of the great upheavals of the past, and in considering their effects, I became skeptical of the great theories concerning celestial motions that were formulated when the historical facts described here were not all known to science. The subject deserves to be discussed in detail and quantitatively. All that I would venture to say at this time and this place is the following. The accepted celestial mechanics, notwithstanding the many calculations that have been carried out to many decimal places or verified by celestial motions, stands only if the sun, the source of light and warmth, and other radiation produced by fusion and fission of atoms, is as a whole an electrical neutral body, and also if the planets and their usual orbits are neutral bodies. Fundamental principles in celestial mechanics, including the law of gravitation, must come into question if the sun possesses a charge sufficient to influence the planets in their gravitation, in their orbits, or comets in theirs. In the Newtonian celestial mechanics, based on the theory of gravitation, electricity and magnetism play no role. Immanuel Velikovsky, New York, 1950. Preface, 1965. First published in 1950, this book was left unchanged in all subsequent printing. Nor have any textual changes been made in this paper-bound edition. This was so by design. I wish to keep the text in its original form in order that, unaltered, it should face all subsequent discovery in the fields it covers or touches upon. Should there have been changes, the reader of a new edition would be unable to judge to what extent a book heretical in 1950 could measure up to later developments. In 1950, it was generally assumed that the fundamentals of science were all known and that only details and decimals were left to fill in. In that same year, a cosmologist, certainly not of a conservative bent of mind, Fred Hoyle, wrote in the conclusion of his book, The Nature of the Universe, "It is likely that any astonishing new developments are lying in wait for us. It is possible that cosmology of 500 years hence will extend as far beyond our present beliefs as our cosmology goes beyond that of Newton." And he continued, "I doubt whether this will be so. I am prepared to believe that there will be many advances in the detailed understanding of matters that still baffle us. But by and large, I think that our present picture will turn out to bear an approximate resemblance to the cosmologies of the future." And he referred to the limitations of optical means in penetrating the depth of space. The years that have passed since the publication of Worlds in Collision have seen the first great achievements in radio astronomy, the discoveries of the International Geophysical Year, and the dawn of the space age. The picture has changed completely. Signs of recent violence, disruption, fragmentation have been observed on Earth and elsewhere in the solar system. A submarine, gigantic canyon that runs almost twice around the globe, a sign of global twist, a layer of ash of extraterrestrial origin underlying all oceans. Paleomagnetic evidence that the magnetic poles were suddenly repeatedly reversed, and it is claimed the terrestrial axis with them. Gases escaping on some craters on the moon, thought to be cold to its center, and exceedingly high surface heat on Venus. Furthermore, with the discovery of radio signals arriving from Jupiter of the existence of a magnetosphere surrounding the Earth, of the solar plasma, of the net charge on the Sun, and the magnetic field permeating the interdisciplinary field of space, decisive evidence has come up that the solar system and the universe in general are not electromagnetically sterile. A basic change in the understanding of the universe, its nature, and the forces active in it. The words found in the preface of the 1950 edition, designating the work as heresy in realms where the names Newton and Darwin reign supreme, should no longer invoke a spontaneous rejection on the part of even the most conservative in science, unless it is a defense mechanism devised to protect an inner realization of incertitude. What, to the scientist, constitutes a really satisfactory sort of success for a theory? The answer lies largely in the words generally elegance, control, and prediction. As to generality, hardly anyone raised an objection. Possibly there was some elegance in the timing when these words were written in 1960, 10 years after the publication of my book and the great opposition it provoked. Some of the mostly compelling data were radioed by the space vehicle Pioneer 5. I would like to relate here a few details about the control and prediction of two crucial tests, decisive for this book. Early in my work, I came to the understanding that Venus is a newcomer to the planetary family, that it had a stormy, if only short history, and that it must still be very hot and giving off heat. Further, that it must be surrounded by a very extensive envelope of hydrocarbon, petroleum, gases, and dust. Such claims were in total disagreement with what was known in 1946, when I completed the manuscript of the work, or in 1950 when it was published. To stress the crucial nature of these claims, they were put under the headings the gases of Venus and the thermal balance of Venus, immediately preceding the section the end. Should I be right in these claims, the entire chain of deductions, of which identification of the extraterrestrial agent of the paroxysm described is but the final ring, is strengthened. And since these crucial claims were in flagrant discord with the accepted values, in case of confirmation, they ought not to be denoted as lucky guesses. As late as 1959, Venus ground temperature was calculated to be only 17 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees above the mean annual temperature of the Earth. But by 1961, from the nature of the radio signals emitted by Venus, it was found that Venus ground temperature is about 315 degrees Celsius, or 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. F.D. Drake of the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, responsible for this reading, wrote, "We would have expected a temperature only slightly greater than that of the Earth, and the find was a surprise in a field in which the fewest surprises were expected. There was admittingly no satisfactory explanation of such high temperature of Venus in the frame of the accepted notions. Greenhouse effect could not explain so high a temperature, nor could radioactivity decaying for billions of years. The Mariner 2, a space vehicle that passed Venus in December 1962, was instrumented to detect whether the heat is real and as high as 600 degrees. It found it real and a full 800 degrees. It found also that the night side of Venus, if anything, hotter than the day side, and that light does not penetrate the cloud cover. It must be gloomy and bleak under this cover. It is stated in the Mariner project by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, very little greenhouse effect could realize itself under such conditions. The other crucial test concerned the gaseous envelope of the planet. In 1946, 4 years before publication of this book, I directed a request and inquiry to Professor R. Wilt of Yale and the late Professor W.S. Adams of Mount Wilson and Palomar Observatories, foremost authorities on the subject of planetary atmosphere. You know, I'm wondering if Halton Arp knew about Velikovsky and what his thoughts were on him. That would be interesting, because Halton Arp was at Palomar, right? Furthermost authorities on the subject of planetary atmosphere indicating that the presence of hydrocarbon gases and dust in the cloud envelope of Venus would constitute a crucial test for the cosmological concepts evolved from the study of historical sources. Wilt wrote on September 13, 1946, "The absorption spectrum of Venus' atmosphere cannot be interpreted as resulting from gaseous hydrocarbons." Adams answered September 9, 1946, "There is no evidence of the presence of hydrocarbon gas in the atmosphere of Venus." I must have been completely firm in my belief of not having made a wrong deduction, from the first premise of global catastrophe to the last one of identifying the agent, to have chosen to print in disregard of the expert opinions on the basis of this research. I assume that Venus must be rich in petroleum gases. On February 26, 1963, making known the results of the Mariner probe, Dr. Homer Newell of NASA announced that in the judgment of those responsible for that part of the program, Venus is enshrouded in an envelope of hydrocarbon gases and dust, 15 miles thick, 45 miles above the ground of the planet. It was acknowledged as very puzzling that Venus should have such a massive atmosphere, a score of times heavier than the terrestrial atmosphere, that it should have taken the form of an envelope 45 miles above the surface of the planet, and that it should consist of heavy molecules of hydrocarbon gases and dust. It was also found that Venus rotates retrogradely, though very slowly, a sign of its having been disturbed in its motion in the past, or having been captured by the sun, or having originated in a way different from the other planets. At the time of the Mariner probe, two prominent members of the American scientific community, V. Bargmann, professor of physics, Princeton University, and Lloyd Motz, professor of astronomy, Columbia University, wrote a letter to Science, December 21, 1962, claiming for me the correct prediction of the great heat of Venus, of the radio noises from Jupiter, of the existence of a magnetosphere around the Earth. A paper, some additional examples of correct prognosis, written by me, was printed in the September 1963 issue of the American Behavioral Scientist. It contains a survey of various tests, confirmations, and supporting evidence. And that issue, sponsored by a group of eminent men in scholarship and public affairs, it has also told the story of reception or rejection of this book, coupled with efforts toward its suppression. It was actually successfully suppressed while in the hands of the first publisher, who had to give it up, though a #1 bestseller, under the exerted boycott of all this publisher's textbooks by certain groups organized for that purpose in some of the academic councils of the country. Some attempts were made to minimize the value of the crucial test claimed and confirmations obtained. A prominent astronomer wrote in December 1963 issue of Harper's, "As to the high temperature of Venus, hot is only a relative term. For example, liquid air is hot relative to liquid helium, whereas I claimed an incandescent state of Venus and a gaseous state of all hydrocarbons." Professor H. Hess, chairman of the Space Board of the National Academy of Sciences, volunteered to write me a letter for publication. Some of these predictions were said to be impossible when you made them. All of them were predicted long before proof that they were correct came to hand. Conversely, I do not know of any specific prediction you made that was since proven to be false. If my premises are wrong, and only by sheer chance did I obtain such a score, then the theorists of probabilities ought to find out the odds involved. If, as some friendlier skeptics assume, the score is due to an unusual gift of intuition, then I should be accused of sorcery, not only of heresy. However, if the story is a reconstruction of the events that took place and of logical implications of them, then the score is but a natural fallout from a single central idea, our Jurgens. Nevertheless, more efforts were made to disqualify this work, but hardly any astronomical argument of 1950 could be brought profitably against my book in 1964 without denying all the important discoveries of the intervening years. Therefore, attempts were made to evade all these issues and to switch the debate, actually a campaign of depreciation, to questioning my proper use of sources. When a journal printed for physicists serves its readers with philological arguments in Egyptology and commits the task to a journalist uninformed and rash in the mild appraisal of Professor Moses Macias, and prints a vulgar display of ignorance and distortion, then it is as good as an admission that none of the physical arguments employed earlier could carry weight, and no new ones could be devised. It is about such tactics that the student paper, the Daily Princetonian, wrote editorially February 1964. While it could have been assumed that anyone challenging the basic premises of Newton and Darwin might be laying himself open to a certain amount of argument, the personal vituperation, deliberate misrepresentation of facts, offhand misquotations, efforts at suppression of the books containing the theories, and the denial of the right to rebut opponents in professional journals that Dr. Velikovsky encountered indicate that far more was going on than mere challenge to established ideas. What the Velikovsky affair made crystal clear is that the theories of science may be held not only for the truth they embody, but because of the vested interest they represent for those who hold them. The deplorable tactics of certain groups in the academia have not alienated the younger generation, and the historical and physical evidence accumulating with each passing year did not escape their sight, and conclusions were drawn. What was unbelievable and heretical in 1950 is making great inroads into the science that claimed dogmatic completeness and infallibility as recently as then. On the eve of the publication of Worlds in Collision, the Professor H. Butterfield wrote The Origin of Modern Science, 1949. But the supreme paradox of the scientific revolution is in the fact that things which we find it easy to instill into the boys at school, things which would strike us as the ordinary natural way of looking at the universe, defeated the greatest intellects for centuries. The author, 1965. Indeed. Preface, 1950. Worlds in Collision is a book of wars in the celestial sphere that took place in historical time. In these wars, the planet Earth participated too. This book describes two acts of a great drama. One that occurred 34 to 35 centuries ago, in the middle of the second millennium before the present era. The other in the 8th and beginning of the 7th century before the present era. 26 centuries ago, accordingly. This volume consists of two parts, preceded by a prologue. Harmony, or stability, in the celestial and terrestrial spheres is the point of departure of the present-day concept of the world as expressed in the celestial mechanics of Newton and the theory of evolution of Darwin. If these two men of science are sacrosanct, this book is a heresy. However, modern physics of atoms and of the quantum theory describes dramatic changes in the microcosm, the atom, the prototype of the solar system. A theory, then, that envisages not dissimilar events in the macrocosm. The solar system brings the modern concepts of physics to the celestial sphere. This book is written for the instructed and uninstructed alike. No formula, no hieroglyphic will stand in the way of those who set out to read it. If occasionally historical evidence does not square with formulated laws, it should be remembered that a law is but a deduction from experience and experiment, and therefore laws must conform with historical facts, not the facts with laws. The reader is not asked to accept a theory without question. Rather, he is invited to consider for himself whether he is reading a book of fiction or nonfiction, whether he is reading is invention or historical fact. On one point alone, not necessarily decisive for the theory of cosmic catastrophism, I borrow credence. I use a synchronical scale of Egyptian and Hebrew histories, which is not orthodox. It was in the spring of 1940 that I came upon the idea that in the days of the Exodus, as evident from many passages of the scriptures, there occurred a great physical catastrophe, and that such an event could serve in determining the time of the Exodus in Egyptian history or in establishing a synchronical scale for the histories of the peoples concerned. Thus, I started Ages in Chaos, a reconstruction of the history of the ancient world from the middle of the second millennium, before the present era, to the advent of Alexander the Great. Already, in the fall of that same year, 1940, I felt that I had acquired an understanding of the real nature and extent of the catastrophe, and for 9 years I worked on both projects, the political and natural histories. Although Ages in Chaos was finished first in the order of publication, it will follow this work. Worlds in Collision comprises only the last 2 acts of the cosmic drama. A few earlier acts, one of them known as the Deluge, will be the subject of another volume of natural history. The historical cosmological story of this book is based on the evidence of historical texts of many peoples around the globe, on classical literature, on epics of northern races, on sacred books of the peoples of the Orient and Occident, on traditions and folklore of primitive peoples, on old astronomical inscriptions and charts, on archaeological finds, and also on geological and paleontological material. If cosmic upheavals occurred in the historical past, why does not the human race remember them? And why was it necessary to carry on research to find out about them? I discuss this problem in the section Collective Amnesia. The task I had to accomplish was not unlike that faced by a psychoanalyst who, out of disassociated memories and dreams, reconstructs a forgotten traumatic experience in the early life of an individual in an analytical experiment on mankind. Historical inscriptions and legendary motifs often play the same role as recollection, infantile memory, and dreams in the analysis of a personality. Can we, out of this polymorphous material, establish actual facts? We shall check one people against another, one inscription against another, epics against charts, geology against legends, until we are able to extract the historical facts. In a few cases, it is impossible to say with certainty whether a record or tradition refers to one or another catastrophe that took place through the ages. It is also probable that in some traditions, various elements from different ages are fused together. In the final analysis, however, it is not so essential to segregate definitively the records of single world catastrophes. More important, it seems, is to establish, 1, that there were physical upheavals of a global character in historical times. 2, that these catastrophes were caused by extraterrestrial agents. And 3, that these agents can be identified. There are many implications that follow from these conclusions. I refer to them in the epilogue so that I can omit reference to them here. A few readers went over this book in manuscript and made valuable suggestions and remarks in chronological order. Of their reading, they are Dr. Horace M. Callan, formerly Dean of Graduate Faculty of the New School for Social Research, New York; John J. O'Neill, Science Editor of the New York Herald Tribune; James Putnam, Associate Editor of the Macmillan Company; Clifton Fademan, Literary Critic and Commenter; Gordon A. Atwater, Chairman and Curator of the Hayden Planetarium and the American Museum of Natural History, New York. The last 2 read the work at their own request after Mr. O'Neill had discussed it in an article in the Herald Tribune of August 11th, 1946. I am indebted to all of them, but I alone am responsible for content and form. Miss Marion Kuhn cleared the manuscript of grammatical weeds and helped in reading the proofs. Many an author has dedicated his book to his wife, or mentioned her in the preface. I've always felt this was somewhat ostentatious, but now that this work is being published, I feel I shall be most ungrateful if I fail to mention that my wife, Ella Shiva, spent almost as much time behind at our desk as I did. I dedicate this book to her. The years when Ages in Chaos and Worlds in Collision were written were years of a world catastrophe created by man. The years when Ages in Chaos and Worlds in Collision were written were years of a world catastrophe created by man, of war that was fought on land, on sea, and in the air. During the time, man learned how to take apart a few of the bricks of which the universe is built, the atoms of uranium. If one day he should solve the problem of fission and fusion of the atoms of which the crust of the earth or the water or air are composed, he may by chance, by initiating a chain reaction, take this planet out of the struggle for survival among the members of the celestial sphere. New York, September 1949. The author.
Chapter 1. In an Immense Universe. Quota pars apuris tanti nobis commuter. Seneca. In an immense universe, a little globe revolves around a star. It is the third star in a row. Mercury, Venus, Earth, of the planetary family. It is of a solid core covered over most of its surface with liquid. It has a gaseous envelope. Living creatures fill the liquid. Other living creatures fly in the gas, and still others creep and walk upon the ground on the bottom of the gaseous ocean. Man, a being of erect stature, thinks himself the prince of creation. He felt like this long before he, by his own efforts, came to know how to fly on wings of metal around the globe. He felt godlike before he could talk to his fellow man on the other side of the globe. Today, he can see the microcosm in a drop of water, and the elements in the stars. He knows the laws governing the living cell and its chromosomes, and the laws governing the macrocosm of the sun, moon, planets, and stars. He assumes that gravitation keeps the planetary system together. Man and beast on their planet, the sea within its borders. For millions and millions of years, he maintains, the planets have rolled along on the same paths, and their moons around them, and man in these eons has arisen from a one-cell infusorium all the long way up the ladder to his status of Homo sapien. Is man's knowledge now nearly complete? Are only a few more steps necessary to conquer the universe? To extract the energy of the atom? Since these pages were written, this has already been done. To cure cancer, to control genetics, to communicate with other planets, and learn if they have living creatures too. Here begins Homo ignoramus.
He does not know what life is, or how it became to be, whether it originated from inorganic matter. He does not know whether other planets of this sun or of other suns have life on them, whether the forms of life there are like those around us, ourselves included. He does not know how this solar system came into being, although he has built up a few hypotheses around it. He knows only that the solar system was constructed billions of years ago. He does not know what this mysterious force of gravitation is that holds him and his fellow man on the other side of the planet, with their feet on the ground. Although he regards the phenomenon itself as the law of laws, he does not know what the earth looks like 5 miles under his feet. He does not know how mountains came into existence, or what caused the emergence of the continents, although he builds hypotheses around these. Nor does he know from where oil came. Again, hypotheses. He does not know why, only a short time ago, a thick glacial sheet pressed upon most of Europe and North America, as he believes it did. Nor how palms could grow above the polar circle, nor how it came about that the same fauna fill the inner lakes of the old and the new world. He does not know where the salt in the sea came from. Although man knows that he has lived on this planet for millions of years, he finds a recorded history of only a few thousand years, and even these few thousand years are not sufficiently well known. Why did the Bronze Age precede the Iron Age, even though iron is more widely distributed over the world, and its manufacture is simpler than that of the alloy of copper and tin? But what mechanical means were structures of immense blocks built on high mountains of the Andes? It is a mystery. Why did brass come before iron if iron is so much easier to make and stronger? What caused the legend of the flood to originate in all countries of the world? Is there any adequate meaning to the term antediluvian? From what experiences grew the eschatological pictures of the end of the world? In this work, of which the present book is the first, of these questions will be answered, but only at the cost of giving up certain notions now regarded as sacred laws in science. The millions of years of the present constitution of the solar system and the harmonious revolution of the Earth, with all their implication as regards to the theory of evolution. The celestial harmony. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The day consists of 24 hours. The year consists of 365 days, 5 hours, and 49 minutes. The moon circles the earth, changing its phases: crescent, full, decrescent. The terrestrial axis points in the direction of the polar star. After winter comes spring, then summer, then fall. These are common facts. Are they invariable laws? Must it be forever? Was it always so? The sun has 9 planets. Mercury has no satellites. Venus has no satellites. The Earth has the moon. Mars has 2 small trabants, mere pieces of rock, and one of them completes its month before Mars ends its day. Jupiter has 11 moons. This was back in the 1940s when he wrote this, pre-space age, and 11 different kinds of months to count. Saturn has, Jupiter has 79 moons. Saturn has 82. That's the last current. Uranus has 5 moons here. That was what was known by science at the time. I'll just leave it at that. Neptune 1, Pluto none. The sun rotates in an easterly direction. All planets revolve in their orbits in the same direction, counterclockwise if seen from the north, around the sun. Most of their moons revolve counterclockwise in direct motion, but there are a few that revolve in the opposite direction, in retrograde motion. No orbit is an exact circle. There is no regularity to the eccentrical shapes of the planetary orbits. Each elliptical curve verges in a different direction. It is not known for certain, but it is assumed that Mercury permanently shows the same face to the sun, as our moon does with respect to the Earth. Information obtained by different methods of observation of Venus is contradictory. It is not known whether Venus rotates so slowly that its day equals its year, or so rapidly that the night side is never sufficiently cooled. Mars rotates in 24 hours, 37 minutes, 22.6 mean period, a period comparable to the terrestrial day. Jupiter, which in volume is 1,300 times larger than the Earth, completes a rotation in the short space of 9 hours and 50 minutes. It's spinning. What causes this variability? Is it not a law that planets should rotate, or have days and nights? Still less that its day and night must return every 24 hours. If Pluto rotates from east to west, it has the sun rising in the west. Uranus has the sun rising and setting neither in the east nor the west, so it is not a law that a planet of the solar system must rotate from west to east, and that the sun must rise in the east. The equator of the Earth is inclined to the plane of its ecliptic at an angle of 23.5 degrees. This causes the change of seasons during the annual revolution of the sun. The axes of the other planets point in other directions of seemingly deliberate choice. It is not a general law for all planets that winter must follow fall and summer equals spring. The axis of Uranus is placed almost in the plane of its orbit. For about 20 years, one of its polar regions is the hottest place on the planet. Then night gradually descends, and 20 years later, the other pole enters the tropics for an equal length of time. The moon has no atmosphere. It is not known whether Mercury has any atmosphere. Venus is covered with dense clouds, but not of water vapor. Mars has a transparent atmosphere, but almost without oxygen or water vapor. Its composition is unknown. Jupiter and Saturn have gaseous envelopes. It is not known whether they have solid cores. It is not a general law that a planet have an atmosphere or water. Mars is 0.15 the volume of the Earth. The next planet, Jupiter, is about 8,750 times as large as Mars. There is no regularity of or relation between the size of the planets and their position in the system. On Mars are seen canals and polar caps. On the moon, craters. The Earth has reflecting oceans. Venus has brilliant clouds. Jupiter has belts and a red spot. Saturn has rings. The celestial harmony is composed of bodies different in size, different in form, different in the velocity of rotation, with differently directed axis of rotation, with different directions of rotation, with differently composed atmospheres, or without atmospheres, with a varying number of moons or without moons, and with satellites revolving in either direction. It appears then to be by chance that the Earth has a moon, that we have day and night, and that their combined length is equal to 24 hours. That we have a sequence of seasons. We have oceans and water, atmosphere and oxygen, and probably also that our planet is placed between Venus at our left and Mars at our right. The origin of the planetary system. All theories of the origin of the planetary system and the motive forces that sustain the motion of its members go back to the gravitational theory and the celestial mechanics of Newton. The sun attracts the planets, and if it were not for a second urge, they would fall into the sun. But each planet is impelled by its momentum to proceed in a direction away from the sun, and as a result, an orbit is formed. Similarly, a satellite or a moon is subject to an urge that drives it away from its primary. But the attraction of the primary bends the path on which the satellite would have proceeded if there had been no primary, if there had been no attraction between the bodies. And out of these urges, a satellite's orbit is traced. The inertia or persistence of motion implanted in planets and satellites was postulated by Newton, but he did not explain how or when the initial pull or push occurred. The theory of the origin of planetary system, which dominated the entire 19th century, was proposed by Swedenborg, the theologian, and Kant, the philosopher. It was put into scientific terms by Laplace, although not explored by him quantitatively, and in brief is as follows. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the sun was nebulous and very large, and had a form approaching that of a disk. This disk was as wide as the whole orbit of the furthest of the planets. It rotated around its center, owing to the process of compression caused by gravitation. A globular sun shaped itself in the center of the disk. Because of the rotating motion of the whole nebula, a centrifugal force was in action. Parts of matter, more on the periphery, resisted the attracting action directed toward the center and broke up into rings, which balled into globes. These were planets in the process of shaping. In other words, as a result of the shrinkage of the rotating sun, matter broke away and portions of this solar material developed into planets. The plane in which the planets revolve is the equatorial plane of the sun. This theory is now regarded as unsatisfactory. Three objections stand out above others. First, the velocity of the axial rotation of the sun, at the time the planetary system was built, could not have been sufficient to enable bands of matter to break away. But even if they had broken away, they would not have balled into globes. Second, the Laplace theory does not explain why planets have larger angular velocity of daily rotation and yearly revolution than the sun could have imparted to them. Third, what made some of the satellites revolve retrogradely, or in a direction opposite to that most of the members of the solar system? It appears to be clearly established that whatever structure we assign to a primitive sun, a planetary system cannot come into being merely as the result of the sun's rotation. If a sun rotating alone in space is not able of itself to produce its family of planets and satellites, it becomes necessary to invoke the presence and assistance of some second body. This brings us at once to the tidal theory. The tidal theory, which in its earlier stage was called the planetesimal theory, assumes that a star passed close to the sun. An immense tide of matter arose from the sun in the direction of the passing star and was torn from the body of the sun, but remained in its domain, being the material out of which the planets were built. In the planetesimal theory, the mass that was torn out broke into small parts which solidified in space. Some were driven out of the solar system, and some fell back into the sun, but the rest moved around it because of its gravitational pull. Sweeping into elongated orbits around the sun, they conglomerated, rounded out their orbits as a result of mutual collisions, and grew to form planets and satellites around the planets. The tidal theory does not allow the matter torn from the sun to disperse first and reunite later. The tide broke into a few portions that rather quickly changed from gaseous fluid and then to the solid state. In support of this theory, it was indicated that such a tide, when broken into a number of drops, would probably build the largest drops out of its middle portion and the small drops from its beginning near the sun and its end most remote from the sun. Actually, Mercury, nearest to the sun, is a small planet. Venus is larger, Earth a little larger than Venus. Jupiter is 320 times as large as the Earth in mass. Saturn is somewhat smaller than Jupiter. Uranus and Neptune, though large planets, are not as large as Jupiter and Saturn. Pluto is quite small as Mercury. The first difficulty of the tidal hypothesis lies in the very point adduced in its support, the mass of the planets. Between the Earth and Jupiter, there revolves a small planet, Mars, a 10th part of the Earth in mass, where, according to the scheme, a planet 10 to 50 times as large as the Earth should be expected. Again, Neptune is larger and not smaller than Uranus. Another difficulty is the allegedly rare chance of an encounter between two stars. One of the authors of the tidal theory gave this estimate of its probability. You remember the load of dust, the Burnham model, two specks of dust, 4.5 miles apart, the sun and its nearest star. It's amazing when you look at it that way. At a rough estimate, we may suppose that a given star's chance of forming a planetary system is 1 in 5, that would be millions, billions, trillions, quadrillion. See how many sets of zeros? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets of zeros with 5 quadrillion years. But since the lifespan of a star is much shorter than this figure, only about 1 star in 100,000 can have formed a planetary system in the whole of its life. But we know that's not true now. In the galactic system of 100 million stars, planetary systems form at a rate of about 1 per 5 billion. Our own system, with the age of the order of 2 billion years, is probably the youngest system in the whole galactic system of stars. The nebular and tidal theories alike regard the planets as derivatives of the sun, and the satellites as derivatives of the planets. The problem of the origin of the moon can be regarded as disturbing to the tidal theory. Being smaller than the Earth, the moon completed earlier the process of cooling and shrinking, and the lunar volcanoes had already ceased to be active. It is calculated that the moon possesses a lighter specific weight than the Earth. It is assumed that the moon was produced from the superficial layers of the Earth's body, which are rich in light silicon, whereas the core of the Earth, the main portion of its body, is made of heavy metals, particularly iron. But this assumption postulates the origin of the moon as not simultaneous with the origin of the Earth. The Earth, being formed out of a mass ejected from the sun, had to undergo a process of leveling, which placed the heavy metals in the core and the silicon at the periphery, before the moon parted from the Earth by a new tidal distortion. This would mean 2 consecutive tidal distortions in a system. The chance of even one is held extremely rare. If the passing of one star near another happens among 100 million stars once in 5 billion years, 2 occurrences like this for one and the same star seem quite incredible. Therefore, as no better explanation is available, the satellites are supposed to have been torn from the planets by the sun's attraction on their first perihelion passage. When sweeping along on stretched orbits, the planets came close to the sun. The circling of satellites around the planet also confronts existing cosmological theories with difficulties. Laplace built his theory on the origin of the solar system, on the assumption that all planets and satellites revolve in the same direction. He wrote that the axial rotation of the sun and the orbital revolutions and axial rotations of the 6 planets, the moon, the satellites, and the rings of Saturn present 43 movements, all in the same direction. One finds by the analysis of the probabilities that there are more than 4,000 billion chances to 1 that this arrangement is not the result of chance. This probability is considered higher than that of the reality of historical events, with regard to which no one would venture a doubt. He deduced that a common and primal cause directed the movements of the planets and satellites. Since the time of Laplace, no members of the solar system have been discovered. Now we know that though the majority of the satellites revolve in the same direction as the planets revolve, and the sun rotates, the moons of Uranus revolve in a plane almost perpendicular to the orbital plane of their planet, and 3 of the 11 moons of Jupiter, 1 of the 9 moons of Saturn, and 1 moon of Neptune revolve retrogradely. These facts contradict the main argument of the Laplace theory. A rotating nebula could not produce satellites revolving in 2 directions. The tidal theory. In the tidal theory, the direction of the planet's movement depend on the star that passed. It passed in a plane of which the planets now revolve, and in a direction which determined their circling from west to east. But why should the satellites of Uranus revolve perpendicularly to that plane and some moons of Jupiter and Saturn in reverse directions? This, the tidal theory fails to explain. Birkeland currents. According to all existing theories, the angular velocity of the revolution of a satellite must be slower than the velocity of rotation of its parent. But the inner satellite of Mars revolves more rapidly than Mars rotates. Some of the difficulties that confront the nebular and tidal theories also confront another theory that has been proposed in recent years. According to it, the Sun is supposed to have been a member of a double star system. A passing star crushed the companion of the Sun, and out of its debris planets were formed. In further development of this hypothesis, it is maintained that the larger planets were built out of the debris, and the smaller ones, the so-called terrestrial planets, were formed from the larger ones by a process of cleavage. The birth of smaller, solid planets out of the larger gaseous ones is conjectured in order to explain the difference in the relation of weight to the volume in the larger and smaller planets. But this theory is unable to explain the difference in the specific weights of the smaller planets and their satellites. By a process of cleavage, the moon was born of the Earth. But since the specific weight of the moon is greater than that of the larger planets and smaller than that of the Earth, it would seem to be more in accord with the theory that the Earth was born of the moon, despite its smallness. This confuses the argument. The origin of the planets and their satellites remains unsolved. The theories not only contradict one another, but each of them bears within itself its own contradictions. If the Sun had been unattended by planets, its origin and evolution would have presented no difficulties. The origin of the comets. The nebular and tidal theories endeavor to explain the origin of the solar system, but do not include the comets in their schemes. Comets are more numerous than planets. More than 60 comets are known to belong definitely to the solar system. These are the comets of short periods, less than 80 years. They revolve in stretched ellipses, and all but one do not go beyond the line marked by the orbit of Neptune. It is estimated that besides the comets of short periods, several 100,000 comets visit the solar system. However, it is not known for certain that they return periodically. They are seen presently at an approximate rate of 500 in a century, and are said to have an average period of tens of thousands of years. A few theories of the origin of comets have been proposed, but aside from one attempt to see in them planetesimals that did not receive a side pole sufficiently strong to bring them into circular orbits. No scheme has been developed that explains the origin of the solar system in its entirety, with its planets and comets, yet no cosmic theory can persist which limits itself to the problem of either planets or comets exclusively. One theory sees in the comets errant cosmic bodies arriving from interstellar space. After approaching the Sun, they turn away on an open parabolic curve. But if they happen to pass close to one of the larger planets, they may be compelled to change their open curves to ellipses and become comets of short period. This is the theory of capture. Comets of long periods, or of no period, are dislodged from their paths to become short-period comets. What the origin of the long-period comets is remains an unanswered question. The short-period comets apparently have some relation to the larger planets. About 50 comets move between the Sun and the orbit of Jupiter. Their periods are under 9 years. 4 comets reach the orbit of Saturn. 2 comets revolve inside the circle described by Uranus, and 9 comets, with an average period of 71 years, move within the orbit of Neptune. These comprise the system of the short-period comets, as it is known at present. To the last group belongs Halley's Comet, which, among the comets of short periods, has the longest period of revolution, about 76 years. Then there is a great gap, after which there are comets that require thousands of years before they return to the Sun, if they return at all. The distribution of the short-period comets suggested the idea that they were captured by the large planets. This theory has for its support the direct observation that comets are disturbed on their path by planets. Another theory of comets supposes their origin to have been in the Sun, but in a manner unlike that conceived of in the tidal theory of the origin of planets. Mighty whirls on the surface of the Sun sweep ignited gases into great protuberances. These are observed daily. Matter is driven off from the Sun and returns to the Sun. It is calculated that if the velocity of the ejection were to exceed 384 miles per second, the speed of motion in a parabola, the matter would not return to the Sun, but would become a long-range comet. Then the path of the ejected mass might become perturbed as a result of its passage near one of the larger planets, and the comet would become one of a short period. Birth of a comet in this manner has never been observed, and the probability that matter in explosion may reach a speed of 384 miles per second is highly questionable. It was therefore supposed, alternatively, that millions of years ago, when the activity of their gaseous masses was more dynamic, the large planets expelled comets from their bodies. The speed required for the ejected mass to overcome the gravitational pull of the ejecting body is less in the case of the planets than in the case of the Sun, owing to their being smaller. Gravitational pull, it is calculated that a mass hurled from Jupiter at a speed of about 38 miles per second, or at only a little more than a third of this velocity in the case of Neptune, would become expelled. This variant of the theory neglects the question of the origin of the long-period comets. However, explanation was offered, according to which the large planets throw the comets that pass close to them from their short orbits into elongated ones, or even expel them entirely from the solar system. When passing close to the Sun, comets emit tails. It is assumed that the material of the tail does not return to the comet's head, but is dispersed in space. Consequently, the comets, as luminous bodies, must have a limited life. If Halley's Comet, or Halley's Comet, whichever you prefer, has pursued its present orbit since Precambrian times, it must have grown and lost 8 million tails. That's a long time, which seems improbable. If comets are wasted, their number in the solar system must permanently diminish, and no comet of short period could have preserved its tail since geological times. But as there are many luminous comets of short period, they must have been produced or acquired at some time when other members of the system, the planets and the satellites, were already in their places. A theory has been offered that once the solar system moved through a nebula and obtained its comets there, but that's just a surmise that could never be proven or disproven. Did the sun emit planets by shrinkage, or by tide, and comets by explosion? Did the comets come from interstellar space? And were they captured into the solar system by larger planets? Did the larger planets produce the smaller planets by cleavage? Or did they expel the short-period comets from their bodies? It is admitted that we cannot know the truth about the origin of the planetary and cometary systems billions of years ago. The problem of the origin and development of the solar system suffers from the label speculative. It is frequently said that as we were not there when the system was formed, we cannot legitimately arrive at any idea of how it was formed. The most we can do, it is believed, is to investigate one planet, the one under our feet, in order to learn its past, and then, by the deductive method, to apply results to other members of the solar system. End of chapter. I think that the comets, many of them could have been caused by the dynamic electric situation that existed when the planets were closer together. That's just what I think. Thanks for listening. Worlds in Collision, Chapter 2. Planet Earth. The planet Earth has a stony shell. The lithosphere, it consists of igneous rock, like granite and basalt, with sedimentary rock on top. The igneous rock is the original crust of the Earth. Sedimentary rock is deposited by water. The inner composition of the Earth is not known. The propagation of seismic waves gives support to the assumption that the shell of the Earth is over 2,000 miles thick on a basis of the gravitational effect of mountain masses, the theory of isostasy. The shell is estimated to be only 60 miles thick. The preference of iron in the shell, or the migration of heavy metals from the core to the shell, has not been sufficiently explained. For these metals to have left the core, they must have been ejected by explosions. And in order to remain spread through the crust, the explosions must have been followed immediately by cooling. If in the beginning, the planet was a hot conglomerate of elements, as the nebular as well as the tidal theories assume, then the iron of the globe should have become oxidized and combined with all available oxygen. But for some unknown reason, this did not take place. Thus, the presence of oxygen in the terrestrial atmosphere is unexplained. The water of the oceans contains a large amount of soluble sodium chloride, common salt. Sodium might have been from rocks eroded by rain, but rocks are poor in chlorine, and the proportion of sodium and chlorine in seawater calls for 50 times more chlorine in the igneous rock than it actually contains. The deep strata of igneous rock contains no signs of fossil life. Increased in sedimentary rock are skeletons of marine and land animals, often many layers, one upon the other. Not infrequently, igneous rock is found protruding into sedimentary rock, or even covering it in large areas, pointing to successive eruptions of igneous rock that became heated and molten after there was life on Earth. Upon strata which shows no signs of fossil life are strata containing shells, and sometimes the shells are so numerous as to constitute the entire mass of the rock. They are often found in the hardest rock. Higher strata contain skeletons of land animals, often of extinct species, and not infrequently. Above the strata with the remains of land animals are other strata with marine fauna. The species of the animals and even their genera change with the strata. The strata often assume an oblique position, sometimes being almost vertical. Frequently, they are faulted and overturned in many ways. Cuvier, 1769 to 1832, the founder of vertebrate paleontology, or the science of petrified skeletons of animals possessing vertebrae, from fish to man, was much impressed by the picture presented by the sequence of the layers of earth. When the traveler passes over these fertile plains, where gently flowing streams nourish in their course an abundant vegetation, and where soil inhabited by numerous population, adorned with flourishing villages, opulent cities, and superb monuments, is never disturbed by the ravages of war or by the oppression of the powerful. He is not led to suspect that nature also has had her intestine wars, and that the surface of the globe has been broken up by revolutions and catastrophes. But his ideas change soon as he digs into the soil, which now presents so peaceful an aspect. Cuvier thought that great catastrophes had taken place on Earth, repeatedly, changing seabeds into continents and continents into seabeds. He held that genera and species were unchangeable since creation. But observing different animal remains in various levels of Earth, he concluded that catastrophes must have annihilated life in vast areas, leaving the ground for other forms of life. Where did these genera come from? Either they were newly created, or more likely they migrated from other parts of the world, which were not at the time also visited by cataclysms. He could not find the cause of these cataclysms. He saw in their traces the problem in geology. It is of most importance to solve, but he realized that in order to resolve it satisfactorily, it would be necessary to discover the cause of these events, an undertaking which presents a difficulty of quite a different kind. He knew only of many fruitless attempts already made, and he did not find himself able to offer a solution. These ideas have haunted, I may almost say have tormented me during my researches among fossil bones. Cuvier's theory of stabilized forms of life and annihilating catastrophes was supplanted by a theory of evolution in geology, Lyell, and biology, Darwin. The mountains are what is left of plateaus eroded by wind and water in a very slow process. Sedimentary rock is detritus of igneous rock eroded by rain, then carried to the sea, and there slowly deposited. Skeletons of birds and of land animals in these rocks are presumed to have belonged to animals who had waded close to the shore of the sea in shallow water, died while wading, and were covered in sediment before fish destroyed their cadavers, or the water separated the bones of their skeletons. No widespread catastrophes disrupted the slow and steady process. The theory of evolution, which can be traced to Aristotle, and which was the teaching of Lamarck in the days of Cuvier and Darwin after him, has been generally accepted as truth by natural sciences. For almost 100 years, sedimentary rock covers high mountains, and the highest of all, the Himalayas. Shells and skeletons of sea animals are found there. This means that at some early time, fish swam over these mountains. What caused the mountains to rise? A force pushing from within, or pulling from without, or twisting on the sides must have elevated the mountains and lifted continents from the bottom of the sea and submerged other land masses. And that is scary. If we do not know what these forces are, we cannot answer the problem of the origin of the mountains and of continents wherever on the globe we are faced with it. Here is how the question is put concerning the eastern coast of North America. Not long ago, in a geological sense, the flat plain from New Jersey to Florida was under the sea. At that time, the ocean surf broke directly on the old Appalachian Mountains. Previously, the southeastern part of the mountain structure had sunk below the sea and become covered with a layer of sand and mud, thickened seaward. A wedge-like mass of marine sediments was then uplifted and cut into by rivers, giving the Atlantic coastal plain of the United States. Why was it uplifted? To the westward are the Appalachians. The geologist tells us of the stressful times when a belt of rocks extending from Alabama to Newfoundland was jammed, thrust together to make this mountain system. Why? How was it done? In former times, the sea flooded the region of the Great Plains from Mexico to Alaska and then withdrew. Why this change? The birth of the Cordilleras, again the mystery of mountain-making climbers for solution. And so on, all over the world. The Himalayas were under the sea. Now Eurasia is 3 miles or more above the bottom of the Pacific. Why? The problem of mountain making is a vexing one. Many of them, mountains, are composed, tangentially compressed, and overthrust rocks that indicate scores of miles of circumferential shortening in the Earth's crust. Radial shrinkage is woefully inadequate to cause the observed amount of horizontal compression. Therein lies the perplexity of the problem of mountain making. Geologists have not yet found a satisfactory escape from this dilemma. Even authors of textbooks confess their ignorance. Why have sea floors of remote periods become the lofty highlands of today? What generates the enormous forces that bend, break, and mash the rocks in mountain zones? These questions still await satisfactory answers. The process of raising the mountains is supposed to have been very slow and gradual. On the other hand, it is clear that igneous rock, already hard, had to become fluid in order to penetrate sedimentary rock or cover it. It is not known what initiated this process, but it is asserted that it must have happened long before man appeared on Earth. So when skulls of early man are found in late deposits, or skulls of modern man are found together with bones of extinct animals in early deposits, difficult problems are presented. Occasionally, also during mining operations, a human skull is found in the middle of a mountain. under a thick cover of basalt or granite, like the Calaveras skull from California. Human remains and human artifacts of bone, polished stone, or pottery are found under great deposits of till and gravel, sometimes under as much as 100 feet. The origin of clay, sand, and gravel on igneous and sedimentary rock offers a problem. The theory of ice ages was put forth, 1840, to explain this and other enigmatic phenomena. As for north as Spitsbergen, the polar circle, at some time in the past, coral reefs were formed, which do not occur except in tropical regions. Palms also grew on Spitsbergen. The regions, the continent of Antarctica, which today has not a single tree on it, must have been covered at one time by forests, since it has coal deposits. As we see, the planet Earth is full of secrets. We have not come closer to solving the problem of the origin of the solar system by investigating the planet under our feet. On the contrary, we have found many other unsolved problems concerning the lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere of the Earth. Shall we be more fortunate if we try to understand the process that caused the changes on the globe in the most recent geological epoch, the time of the last glacial period, close to the time which is regarded as historic? Ice ages. Not many thousands of years ago, we were taught great areas of Europe and North America were covered by glaciers. Perpetual ice lay not only on the slopes of high mountains, but loaded itself in heavy masses upon continents, even in moderate latitudes, where today the Hudson, the Elbe, and the upper Dnieper flow. There were then frozen deserts. They were like the immense glacier of Greenland that covers that island. There are signs that a retreat of the glaciers was interrupted by new massing of ice, and their borders differed at various times. Geologists are able to find the boundaries of the glaciers. Ice moves very slowly, pushing stones before it, and accumulations of stones, or moraines, remained when glacier retreats melting away. Traces have been found of 5 or 6 consecutive displacements of the ice sheet during the Ice Age, or of 5 or 6 glacial periods. Some force repeatedly pushed the ice sheet toward moderate latitude. Neither the cause of the ice ages nor the cause of the retreat of the ice desert is known. The time of these retreats is also a matter of speculation. Many ideas were offered and guesses made to explain how the glacial epochs originated and why they terminated. Some supposed that the sun, at different times, emits more or less heat, which causes periods of heat and cold on Earth. But no evidence that the sun is such a variable star was adduced to support this hypothesis. Others conjectured that cosmic space has warmer and colder areas, and that when our solar system travels through the cooler areas, ice descends upon the latitudes close to the tropics. But no physical agents were found responsible for such hypothetical cold and warm areas in space. A few wondered whether the precession of the equinoxes, or the slow change in the direction of the terrestrial axis, might cause periodic variation in the climate. But it has shown that the difference in isolation could not have been great enough to have been responsible for glacial ages. Still, others thought to find the answer with glaciation at the maximal eccentricity. Some of them supposed that winter in aphelion, the remotest part of the ecliptic, would cause glaciation. And some thought that summer in aphelion would produce that effect. Some scholars thought about the changes in position of the terrestrial axis, If the planet Earth is rigid, it is regarded to be he, L. Kelvin. The axis could not have shifted in geological times by more than 3 degrees. George Darwin. If it were elastic, it would have shifted up to 10 or 15 degrees in a very slow process. The cause of the ice ages was seen by a few scholars in the decrease of the original heat of the planet. The warm periods between the ice ages were attributed to the heat set free by a hypothetical decomposition of organisms in the strata, those to the surface of the ground. The increase and decrease in the action of warm springs were also considered. Others suppose that dust of volcanic origin filled the terrestrial atmosphere and hindered insolation, or, contrariwise, that an increased content of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere obstructed the reflection of heat rays from the surface of the planet. A decrease in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would cause a fall of temperature, Arrhenius. But calculations were made to show that this could not be the real cause of the glacial ages, Angstrom. Changes in the direction of warm currents in the Atlantic Ocean were brought into the discussion, and the Isthmus of Panama was theoretically removed to allow the Gulf Stream to pass into the Pacific at the time of the glacial periods. But it was proved that 2 oceans were already divided in the Ice Age. Besides, a part of the Gulf Stream would have remained in the Atlantic anyway. The periodic retreats of ice between the glacial periods would have required periodic removal and replacement of the Isthmus of Panama. Other theories of equally hypothetical nature were proposed, but the phenomena held responsible for the changes have not been proved to have existed or to have been able to produce the effect. All the above-mentioned theories and hypotheses fail if they cannot meet a most important condition. In order for ice masses to have been formed, increased precipitation must have taken place. This requires an increased amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, which is the result of increased evaporation from the surface of oceans. But this could be caused by heat only. A number of scientists pointed out this fact and even calculated that in order to produce a sheet of ice as large as that of the Ice Age, the surface of all of the oceans must have evaporated to a depth of many feet. Such an evaporation of oceans followed by a quick process of freezing, even in moderate latitudes, would have produced the Ice Ages. The problem is, what could have caused the evaporation and immediately subsequent freezing as the cause of such quick alternation of heating and freezing of large parts of the globe is not apparent. It is conceded that at present the cause of excessive ice making on the lands remains a baffling mystery, a major question for the future reader of Earth's riddles. Not only are the causes of the appearance and later disappearance of the glacial sheet unknown, that the geographical shape of the area covered by ice is also a problem. Why would the glacial sheet in the southern hemisphere move from the tropical regions of Africa toward the solar polar region and not the opposite direction? And similarly, why in the northern hemisphere did ice move in India from the equator toward the Himalaya mountains and the higher latitudes? Why did the glaciers of the Ice Age cover the greater part of North America and Europe, while the north of Asia remained free? In America, the plateau of ice stretched up from latitude 40 degrees and even passed across this line in Europe. It reached latitude 50 degrees, while northeastern Siberia above the polar circle, even at latitude 75 degrees, was not covered with this perennial ice. All hypotheses regarding increased diminished isolation due to solar alterations or the changing temperature of the cosmic space or other similar hypotheses cannot avoid being confronted with this problem. Glaciers are formed in regions of eternal snow. For this reason, they remain on the slopes of the high mountains. The north of Siberia is the coldest place in the world. Why did not the Ice Age touch this region, whereas it visited the basin of the Mississippi and all Africa south of the equator? No satisfactory solution to this question has been proposed.
The mammoths. Northeast Siberia, which was not covered by ice in the Ice Age, conceals another enigma. The climate there has apparently changed drastically since the end of the Ice Age, and the yearly temperature has dropped many degrees below its previous level. Animals once lived in this region that do not live there now, and plants grew there that are ungrowable now. The change must have occurred quite suddenly. The cause of this, Climasters, has not been explained. In this catastrophic change of climate, and under mysterious circumstances, all the mammoths of Siberia perished. The mammoth belonged to the family of elephants. Its tusks were sometimes as much as 10 feet long. Its teeth were highly developed, and their density was greater than in any other stage in the evolution of the elephants. Apparently, they did not succumb in the struggle for survival. As an unfit product of evolution, the extinction of the mammoth is thought to have coincided with the end of the last glacial period. Tusks of mammoth have been found in large amounts in northeastern Siberia. This well-preserved ivory has been an object of export to China and Europe ever since the Russian conquest of Siberia, and was exploited in even earlier times. In modern times, the ivory market of the world still found its main source of supply in the tundras of northeast Siberia. In 1799, the frozen bodies of mammoths were found in these tundras. The corpses were well preserved, and the sled dogs ate the flesh unharmed. The flesh is fibrous and marbled with fat, and looks as fresh as well-frozen beef. What was the cause of their death and the extinction of their race? Cuvier wrote of the extinction of the mammoths, repeated eruptions and retreats of the sea have neither all been slow nor gradual. On the contrary, most of the catastrophes which have occasioned them have been sudden, and this is especially easy to be proved with regard to the last of these catastrophes, that which, by a twofold motion, has inundated and afterwards laid dry our present continents, or at least a part of the land which forms them. At the present day, in the northern regions, it has left the carcasses of large quadrupeds which became enveloped in the ice, and have thus been preserved even to our own times, with their skin, their hair, and their flesh. If they had not been frozen as soon as killed, they would have been decomposed by putrefaction. And on the other hand, this eternal frost could not previously have occupied the places in which they have been seized by it, for they could not have lived in such a temperature. It was, therefore, at one and the same moment that these animals were destroyed, and the country which they inhabited became covered with ice. This event has been sudden, instantaneous, without any gradation, so with reference to those which have preceded it. The theory of repeated catastrophes annihilating life on this planet and repeated creations or restorations of life offered by Dulac and expanded on by Cuvier did not convince the scientific world like Lamarck before Cuvier. Darwin, after him, thought that an exceedingly slow evolutional process governs genetics, and that there were no catastrophes interrupting these processes of infinitesimal changes. According to the theory of evolution, these minute changes came as a result of adaptation to living conditions and the struggle of the species for survival, like the theories of Lamarck and Darwin, which postulate slow changes in animals with tens of thousands of years required for a minute step in evolution. The geological theories of the 19th century and of the 20th century as well regard the geological processes as exceedingly slow and dependent on erosion by rain, wind, and tides. Darwin admitted that he was unable to find an explanation for the extermination of the mammoth, an animal better developed than the elephant, which survived. But in conformity with the theory of evolution, his followers supposed that a gradual sinking of the land forced the mammoths to the hills, where they found themselves isolated by marshes. However, geological processes are slow. The mammoths would not have been trapped on the isolated hills. Besides, this theory cannot be true because the animals did not die of starvation. In their stomachs and between their teeth, undigested grass and leaves were found. This, too, proves that they died from a sudden cause. Further investigation showed that the leaves and the twigs found in their stomachs do not grow in the regions where the animals died, far to the south, 1,000 or more miles away. It is apparent that the climate has changed radically since the death of the mammoths, as the bodies of the animals were found not decomposed but well preserved in the blocks of ice. The change in temperature must have followed their death very closely, or even caused it. There remains to be added after storms in the Arctic. Tusks of mammoths are washed up on the shores of Arctic islands. This proves that a part of the land where the mammoths lived and were drowned is covered by the Arctic Ocean.
The Ice Age and the Antiquity of Man. The mammoth lived in the age of man. Man pictured it on the walls of caves. Remains of men have repeatedly been found in Central Europe together with the remains of mammoths. Occasionally, the settlement of Neolithic man of Europe are found strewn with the bones of mammoths. Man moved southward when Europe was covered with ice, and returned when the ice retreated. Historical man witnessed great variation in climate. The man of Siberia, the meat of which is still fresh, is supposed to have been destroyed at the end of the last glacial period, simultaneously with the mammoths of Europe and Alaska. If this is so, the Siberian mammoth was also the contemporary of a rather modern man. At the time when Europe, close to the ice sheet, man was still in the later stages of Neolithic culture, in the Near and Middle East, the region of the great cultures of antiquity. He may already have progressed well into the Metal Age. There exists no chronological table of Neolithic culture because the art of writing was invented approximately at the advent of the copper, the early period of the Bronze Age. It is presumed that the Neolithic man of Europe left pictures but no inscriptions, and consequently there are no means of determining the end of the Ice Age in terms of chronology. Geologists have tried to find the time of the end of the last glacial period by measuring the detritus carried by rivers from the glaciers and the deposits of detritus in lakes, the quantity carried by the Rhone from the glaciers of the Alps, and the amount on the bottom of Lake Geneva, through which the Rhone flows, were calculated, and from the figures obtained the time and velocity of the retreat of the glacial sheet of the last glacial period were estimated. According to the Swiss scholar Francis Forel, 12,000 years have passed since the time the ice sheet of the last glacial period began to melt, an unexpectedly low figure, as it was thought that the Ice Age ended 30 to 50,000 years ago. Such calculations suffer from being only indirect evaluations, and since the velocity at which the glacial mud had been deposited in the lakes was not constant and the amount varied, the mud must have assembled on the bottom of the lake at a faster rate in the beginning when the glaciers were larger. And if the ice age terminated suddenly, the deposition of detritus would have been much heavier at first, and there would be little analogy to the accumulation of detritus from the seasonal melting of snow in the Alps. Therefore, the time that has elapsed since the end of the last glacial period must have been even shorter than reckoned. Geologists regard the Great Lakes of America as having been formed at the end of the Ice Age, when continental glacier retreated and the depressions freed from the glacier became lakes. In the last 200 years, Niagara Falls has retreated from Lake Ontario toward Lake Erie at a rate of about 5 feet annually, washing down the rocks of the bed of the falls. This process has been going on at the same rate since the end of the last glacial period. About 7,000 years were needed to move Niagara Falls from the mouth of the gorge at the Queenston to its present position. The assumption that the quantity of water moving through the gorge has been uniform since the end of the Ice Age is the basis of this calculation, and therefore it has concluded 7,000 years may constitute the maximum length of time since the birth of the falls. In the beginning, when immense masses of water were released by the retreat of the continental glacier, the rate of movement of Niagara Falls must have been much more rapid. The time estimate may need significant reduction and is sometimes lowered to 5,000 years. The erosion and sedimentation of the shores and the bottom of Lake Michigan also suggests a lapse of time counted in thousands, but not in tens of thousands of years. Also, the result of paleontological research in America carries evidence which constitutes a guarantee that before the last period of glaciation, modern man in the form of that highly developed race, the American Indian, was living on the eastern seaboard of North America. It is assumed that with the advent of the last glacial period, the Indians retreated southward, returning to the north when the ice uncovered the ground, and when the Great Lakes emerged, the basin of St. Lawrence was formed, and Niagara Falls began its retreat toward Lake Erie. If the end of the last glacial period occurred only a few thousand years ago, in historical times, or at a time when the art of writing may have been already employed in the centers of ancient civilization, the records written in the rocks by nature and the records written by man must give a coordinated picture. Let us therefore investigate the traditions and the literary records of ancient man and compare them with the records of nature. The World Ages. A conception of ages that were brought to their end by violent changes in nature is common all over the world. The number of ages differs from people to people and tradition to tradition. The difference depends on the number of catastrophes that the particular people retained in its memory, or on the way it reckoned the end of an age. In the annals of ancient Etruria, according to Varro, were records of 7 elapsed ages. Censorinus, the author of the 3rd Christian century and compiler of Varro, wrote that men thought that different prodigies appeared by means of which the gods notified mortals at the end of each age. The Etruscans were versed in the science of the stars, and after having observed the prodigies with attention, they recorded these observations in their books. The Greeks had similar traditions. Where is a period, wrote Censorinus, called the supreme year by Aristotle, at the end of which the sun, the moon, and all the planets return to their original position. This supreme year has a great winter, called by the Greeks cataclysmos, which means deluge, and a great summer, called by the Greeks ekryposis, or combustion of the world. The world actually seems to be inundated and burned alternately in each of these epochs. Anaximensis and Anaximander in the 6th pre-Christian century, and Diogenes of Apolloniana in the 5th century, assumed the destruction of the world with subsequent reaction. Heraclitus, minus 540 to minus 475, taught that the world is destroyed in conflagration after every period of 10,800 years. Aristarchus of Samos in the 3rd century before the present era taught that in a period of 2,484 years, the earth undergoes two destructions, the combustion and deluge. The Stoics generally believed in periodic conflagrations, by which the world was consumed to be shaped anew. This is due to the forces of ever-active fire which exist in things, and in the course of long cycles of time resolves everything into itself, and out of it is constructed a reborn world. So Philo presented the notion of the Stoics that our world is refashioned in periodic conflagrations. In one such catastrophe, the world will meet its ultimate destruction. Colliding with another world, it will fall apart into atoms, out of which, in a long process, a new earth will be created somewhere in the universe. Democritus and Epicurus explained Philo postulate many worlds, the origin of which they ascribe to the mutual impacts of interlacing of atoms, and their destruction to the counterblows and collisions by the bodies so formed. As this earth goes to its ultimate destruction, it passes through reoccurring cosmic catastrophes and is reformed with all that lives on it. Hesiod, one of the earliest Greek authors, wrote about 4 ages and 4 generations of men that were destroyed by the wrath of the planetary gods. The 3rd age, the age of bronze, when it was destroyed by Zeus. A 3rd generation repeopled the earth, and using bronze for arms and tools, they began to use iron too. Heroes of the Trojan War were of this 4th generation. Then a new destruction was decreed, and after that came yet another generation, the 5th, of men who are upon the bounteous earth. The generation of iron, in another work of his, Hesiod described the end of one of the ages. The life-giving earth crashed around in burning. All the land seethed, and the ocean streams. It seemed even as if earth and wide heaven above came together, for such a mighty crash would have arisen if earth were being hurled to ruin, and heaven from on high were hurling her down. Analogous traditions of 4 expired ages persist on the shores of the Bengal Sea and in the highland of Tibet. The present age is the 5th. The sacred Hindu book Bhagavad Purana tells of 4 ages and of pralayas, or cataclysms, which in various epochs mankind was nearly destroyed. The 5th age is that of the present. The world ages are called kalpas, or yugas. Each world age met its destruction in catastrophes of conflagration, flood, and hurricane. Isur Vedam, or Bhagavad Vedam, sacred Hindu hooks, keeping to the scheme of 4 expired ages, differ only in the number of years ascribed to each. In the chapter World Cycles in Visuddhimagga, it is said that there are 3 destructions: the destruction by water, destruction by fire, and destruction by wind. But that there are 7 ages, each of which is separated from the previous one by a world catastrophe. Reference to ages and catastrophes is found in Avesta, Zendavesta, The sacred scriptures of Mazdaism, the ancient religion of the Persians. Bahman Yast, one of the books of Avesta, counts 7 world ages or millennia. Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, the prophet of Mazdaism, speaks of the signs of wonders and perplexity which are manifested in the world at the end of each millennium. The Chinese call the perished ages Kis, and number 10 Kis from the beginning of the world, until Confucius, in the ancient Chinese encyclopedia, Sing Li Ta Sien Chao, the general convulsions of nature are discussed. Because of the periodicity of these convulsions, the span of time between 2 catastrophes is regarded as a great year. As during a year, so during a world age, the cosmic mechanism winds itself up, and in a general convulsion of nature, the sea is carried out of its bed. Mountains spring out of the ground. Rivers change their course. Human beings and everything are ruined, and the ancient traces effaced. An old tradition, and a very persistent one, of world ages that went down in cosmic catastrophes was found in the Americas among the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayas. A major part of stone inscriptions found in Yucatan refer to world catastrophes. The most ancient of these fragments, calendar stones of Yucatan, refer in general to great catastrophes which at intervals and repeatedly convulsed the American continent, and of which all nations of this continent have preserved a more or less distinct memory. Codices of Mexico and Indian authors who composed the annals of their past give a prominent place to the tradition of world catastrophes that decimated humankind and changed the face of the earth. In the chronicles of the Mexican kingdom, it is said, the ancients knew, before the present sky and earth were formed, man was already created and life had manifested itself 4 times. A tradition of successive creations and catastrophes is found in the Pacific, on Hawaii, and on the islands of Polynesia. There were 9 ages, and in each age a different sky was above the earth. Icelanders, too, believed that 9 worlds went down in a succession of ages, a tradition that is contained in the Edda. The rabbinical conception of ages crystallized in the post-exilic period. Already before the birth of our earth, worlds had been shaped and brought into existence only to be destroyed in time. He made several worlds before ours, but he destroyed them all. This earth, too, was not created at the beginning to satisfy the divine plan. It underwent reshaping 6 consecutive remoldings. New traditions were created after each of the catastrophes. On the 4th earth lived the generation of the Tower of Babel. We belong to the 7th age. Each of the ages or earths has a name. 7 heavens were created, and 7 earths were created. The most removed, the 7th. Eretz, the 6th. Adama, the 5th. Arka, the 4th. Haraba, the 3rd. Yeshiba, the 2nd. Tevel, and our owned land called Helid, and like the others, it is separated from the foregoing by abyss, chaos, and water. Great catastrophes changed the face of the earth. Some perished by deluge. Others were consumed by conflagration, wrote the Jewish philosopher Philo. According to the rabbinical authority Rashi, ancient tradition knows of periodic collapses of the firmament, one of which occurred in the days of the deluge, and which repeated themselves at intervals of 1,656 years. The duration of world ages varies in Armenian and Arabian traditions.
The Sun Ages. An oft-repeated occurrence in the tradition of world ages is the advent of the new sun in the sky at the beginning of every age. The word sun is substituted for the word age in the cosmogonal traditions of many peoples all over the world. The Mayas counted their ages by the names of the consecutive suns. These are called water sun, earthquake sun, hurricane sun, fire sun. These suns mark the epochs to which are attributed the various catastrophes the world has suffered. Ixtlcatl, 1568 to 1648, the native Indian scholar, in his Animals of the Kings of Tezcuco, described the world ages by the names of the suns. The water sun, or sun of waters, was the first age, terminated by a deluge in which almost all creatures perished. The earthquake sun, or age, perished in a terrific earthquake. Earth broke up in many places. Mountains fell. The world age of the hurricane sun came to its destruction in a cosmic hurricane. The fire sun was the world age that went down in a rain of fire. The nations of Culha, or Mexico, Humboldt quoted Gomara, the Spanish writer of the 16th century, believed, according to their hieroglyphic paintings, that previous to the sun, which now enlightens them, 4 had already been successfully extinguished. These 4 suns are as many ages, in which our species has been annihilated by inundations, by earthquakes, by general conflagration, and by the effect destroying tempests. Every one of the 4 elements participated in each of the catastrophes. Deluge, hurricane, earthquake, and fire gave their names to the catastrophes because of the predominance of one of them in the upheavals. Symbols of the successive suns are pointed on the pre-Columbian literary documents of Mexico. Cinco soles que son dedes, or 5 suns that are epics, wrote Gomara in his description of the conquest of Mexico. An analogy to this sentence of Gomara may be found in Lucius Impellius, a Roman author, who in his book Liber Memoralis wrote, "Soles figure quinque." There were 5 suns. In this, the same belief that Gomara found in the New World. The Mexican annals of, and all these names, I apologize if I can't pronounce them right, of Caotitlan, written in Nahu Indian circa 1570, and based on ancient sources, contains the tradition of 7 sun epochs. Chican and Tonatiuh, or the 7 suns, is the designation for the world cycles or acts in the cosmic drama. The Buddhist sacred book of Visuddhimagga contains a chapter on world cycles. There are 3 destructions: the destruction by water, the destruction by fire, the destruction by wind. After the catastrophe of the deluge, and now a long period has elapsed from the cessation of the rains, a second sun appeared. In the interim, the world was enveloped in gloom. When this second sun appears, there is no distinction of day and night, but an incessant heart beats upon the world. When the 5th sun appeared, the ocean gradually dried up. When the 6th sun appeared, the whole world became filled with smoke. After the lapse of another long period, a 7th sun appears, and the whole world breaks into flames. This Buddhist book refers also to a more ancient discourse on the 7 suns. The Brahmins called the epochs between 2 destructions the great days. The Sibylline books recite the ages in which the world underwent destruction and regeneration. The Sibyl told as follows: the 9 suns are 9 ages. Now is the 7th sun. The Sibyl prophesies 2 ages yet to come, that of the 8th and 9th sun. The Aborigines of British North Borneo even today declare the sky was originally low and that 6 suns perished, and at present the world is illuminated by the 7th sun. 7 solar ages are referred to in the Mayan manuscripts, in Buddhist sacred books, in the books of the Sibyl. It's spelled S-I-B-Y-L. I'm just taking that as another way to use an I, Sibyl. In all quoted sources, the suns are explained in the sources themselves as signifying consecutive epochs, each of which went down in great general destruction. Did the reason for the substitution of the word sun by the peoples of both hemispheres lie in that changed appearance of the luminary and in its path in each epoch as its world age? There. That's how slow light leaves right there. There's no way that Earth, oops, I keep leaving more light pulses. There's no way that Earth can orbit the sun. That's on that time scale. It would orbit it where it was 8 minutes ago. There's no way it can do that. And that is that whole thing right there. Once you can wrap your head around that, well, for me, that was the clincher. The sun and the earth are in real time, and the galaxy is in real time. It can't, that pokey speed right there, it can't know where itself is at that speed. That's pokey, that's slow. At this rate, it'll take 8 minutes for the ring to go out from the sun and get to the earth. So that's why the earth has to orbit the sun in real time. If you would have no order at all, if this was orbiting this where it was 8 minutes ago, it just wouldn't make sense. Neither would the galaxy. So that's a huge point in the electric universe's favor.
The Hurricane, Chapter 3. The swift shifting of the atmosphere under the impact of the gaseous parts of the comet. The drift of air attracted by the body of the comet. And the rush of the atmosphere resulting from inertia. When the Earth stopped rotating or shifted its poles, all contributed to produce hurricanes of enormous velocity and force and of worldwide dimensions. Manuscript Troino and other documents of the Mayas describe a cosmic catastrophe during which the ocean fell on the continent and a terrible hurricane swept the Earth. The hurricane broke up and carried away all towns and all forests. Exploding volcanoes, tides sweeping over mountains, and impetuous winds threatened to annihilate humankind, and actually did annihilate many species of animals. The face of the earth changed. Mountains collapsed. Other mountains grew and rose over the onrushing cataract of water driven from oceanic spaces. Numberless rivers lost their beds, and a wild tornado moved through the debris, descending from the sky. The end of the world age was caused by hurricane, the physical agent that brought darkness and swept away houses and trees, and even rocks and mounds of the earth. From this name is derived hurricane, the word we use for a strong wind. Hurricane destroyed the major part of the human race. In the darkness swept by wind, resinous stuff fell from the sky and participated with fire and water in the destruction of the world. For 5 days, save for the burning naphtha and burning volcanoes, the world was dark, since the sun did not appear. The theme of a cosmic hurricane is reiterated time and again in the Hindu Vedas. And in the Persian Avesta and Diluvium Vinti, the deluge of wind is a term known from many ancient authors. In the section The Darkness, I quoted rabbinical sources on the exceedingly strong west wind that endured for 7 days, when the land was enveloped in darkness, and the hieroglyphic inscription from the El Orish about 9 days of upheaval, when there was such a tempest that nobody could leave the palace or see the faces of those beside him, and the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which says that 6 days and a night the hurricane, deluge, and tempest continued sweeping the land, and mankind perished almost together. In the battle of the planet god Marduk with Tiamat, he, Marduk, created the evil wind and the tempest, and the hurricane, and the fourthfold wind, and the sevenfold wind, and the whirlwind, and the wind which had no equal. The Maori narrate that amid a stupendous catastrophe, the mighty winds, the fierce squalls, the clouds, dense, dark, fiery, wildly drifting, wildly bursting, rushed on creation. In their midst, Tahiri Mati, father of winds and storms, and swept away giant forests and lashed the waters into billows whose crests rose high like mountains. The earth groaned terribly, and the ocean fled. The earth was submerged in the ocean, but was drawn by Tefanu, relate the Aborigines of Pompatu and Polynesia. The new isles were baited by a star. In the month of March, the Polynesians celebrate a god, Tefanu. In Arabic, typhoon is a whirlwind, and tufan is the deluge. And the same word occurs in Chinese as typhoon. It appears as though the noise of the hurricane was overtoned by a sound not unlike the name typhoon, as if the storm were calling him by name. The cosmic upheaval proceeded with a mighty, strong nest of wind. But before the climax, in the simple words of the scriptures, the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites were on the shore of the Sea of Passage at the climax and the cataclysm. The name Jam Suf is generally rendered as Red Sea. The passage is supposed to have taken place either at the Gulf of Suez or at Aqaba, Gulf of the Red Sea. But sometimes the site of the passage is identified as one of the inner lakes on the route from Suez to the Mediterranean. It is argued that Suf means reed, papyrus reed. And since papyrus reed does not grow in saltwater, Jam Suf must have been a lagoon of fresh water. We will not enter here into a discussion where the sea of the passage was. The inscription on the shrine found in El Arish may provide some indication where the pharaoh was engulfed by the whirlwind. In any event, the topographical distribution of sea and land did not remain the same as before the cataclysm of the days of the Exodus. But the name of the sea of the passage, Jam Suf, was derived not from reed, but from hurricane. Suf, Safa in Hebrew. In Egyptian, the Red Sea is called Shari, which signifies the sea of percussion. Mare percussionis, or the sea of the stroke, or of the disaster. Jeez, a lot of names. The Haggadah of Passover says, "Thou didst sweep the land of Maph and Naph on the Passover." The hurricane that brought an end to the Middle Kingdom in Egypt. Blast of heavenly displeasure, in the language of Manetho, swept through every corner of the world. In order to distinguish in the traditions of the peoples this diluvium vinti of cosmic dimensions from local disastrous storms. Other cosmic disturbances, like disappearance of the sun or change of the sky, must be found accompanying the hurricane. In the Japanese cosmonical myth, the sun goddess hid herself for a long time in a heavenly cave in fear of the storm god. The source of light disappeared. The whole world became dark. The storm god caused monstrous destruction. The gods made terrible noise so that the sun should reappear. From their tumult, the earth quaked. In Japan and in the vast extent of the ocean hurricanes. And earthquakes are not rare occurrences. But they do not disturb the day-night succession, nor is there any resulting permanent change in the sky and its luminaries. The sky was low. Relate the Polynesians of Tefano Island. And then the winds and waterspouts and hurricanes came and carried up the sky to its present height. When a world cycle is destroyed by wind, says the Buddhist text on the world cycles, the wind also turns the ground upside down and throws it into the sky. And areas of 100 leagues in extent, 200, 300, 500 leagues in extent, crack and are thrown upward by the force of the wind, and do not fall again, but are blown to powder in the sky, annihilated. And the wind throws up also into the sky the mountains which encircle the earth. They are ground to powder and destroyed. The cosmic wind blows and destroys 100,000 times 10 million worlds. End of subchapter. The tide. The ocean tides are produced by the action of the sun, and to a larger extent by that of the moon. A body larger than the moon, or one nearer to the earth, would act with greater effect. A comet with a head as large as the earth, passing sufficiently close, would raise the waters of the oceans miles high. The slowing down or stasis of the earth in its rotation would cause a tidal recession of water toward the poles, but the celestial body nearby would disturb this poleward recession, drawing the water toward itself. Traditions of many peoples persist that seas were torn apart and their water heaped high and thrown upon their continents in order to establish that these traditions refer to one event, or at least to an event. We must keep to this guiding sequence. The Chinese annals, which I have mentioned, and which I intend to quote more extensively in a subsequent section, say that in the time of Emperor Yahoo, the sun did not go down for 10 days. The world was in flames, and in their vast extent, the waters overtopped the great heights, threatening the heavens with their floods. The water of the ocean was heaped up and cast upon the continent of Asia. A great tidal wave swept over the mountains and broke in the middle of the Chinese Empire. The water was caught in the valleys between the mountains, and the land was flooded for decades. The traditions of the people of Peru tell that for a period of time equal to 5 days and 5 nights, the sun was not in the sky, and then the ocean left the shore and with a terrible din broke over the continent. The entire surface of the earth was changed in this catastrophe. The Choctaw Indians of Oklahoma relate the earth was plunged in darkness for a long time. Finally, a bright light appeared in the north, but it was mountain-high waves rapidly coming nearer. In these traditions, there are 2 concurrent elements, and a complete darkness that endured a number of days in Asia, prolonged day. And when the light broke through the mountain-high wave that brought destruction, the Hebrew story of the passage of the sea contains the same elements. There was a prolonged and complete darkness, Exodus 10:2-1, or it was at 10:21. The last day of darkness was at the Red Sea. When the world plunged out of darkness, the bottom of the sea was uncovered. The waters were driven apart and heaped up like walls in a double tide. The Septuagint translation of the Bible says that the water stood as a wall, and the Quran, referring to this event, says like mountains. The old rabbinical literature, it is said, that the water was suspended as if it were glass, solid and massive. The commentator Rashi, guided by the grammatical structure of the sentence in the book of Exodus, explained in accordance with Mechilta, the water of all oceans and seas was divided. The Midrashim contain the following description. The waters were piled up to the height of 1,600 miles, and they could be seen by all nations of the earth. The figure in this sentence intends to say that the heap of water was tremendous. According to the scriptures, the water climbed the mountains and stood above them, and they mounted to the heavens. A sea rent apart was a marvelous spectacle and could not have been forgotten. It is mentioned in numerous passages in the scriptures, "The pillars of heaven tremble. He divideth the sea with his power. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as a heap. He gathereth the waters of the sea together as a heap. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him." Then the great sea, the Mediterranean, broke into the Red Sea in an enormous tidal wave. It was an unusual event, and because it was unusual, it became the most impressive recollection in the very long history of this people. All peoples and nations were blasted by the same fire and shattered in the same fury. The tribes of Israel on the shore of the sea found in this annihilation their salvation from bondage. They escaped destruction, but their oppressors perished before their eyes. They extolled the Creator, who took upon themselves the burden of moral rules, and considered themselves chosen for a great destiny. When the Spaniards conquered Yucatan, Indians versed in their ancient literature related to the conquerors the tradition handed down to them by their ancestors, their forefathers, were delivered from pursuit by some other people when the Lord opened for them a way in the midst of the sea. This tradition is so similar to the Jewish tradition of the passage that some of the friars who came to America believed that the Indians of America were of Jewish origin. Friar Diego de Landa wrote, "Some old men of Yucatan say that they have heard from their ancestors that this country was peopled by a certain race who came from the east, whom God delivered by opening for them 12 roads through the sea. If this is true, all the inhabitants of the Indies must be of Jewish descent." It may have been an echo of what happened at the Sea of Passage, or a description of a similar occurrence at the same time, but in another place. According to the Lapland cosmogonic story, when the wickedness increased among the human beings, the midst of the earth trembled with terror, so that the upper layers of earth fell away, and many of the people were hurled down into those caved-in places to perish. And Jubmel, the heaven Lord himself, came down. His terrible anger flashed like red, blue, and green fire serpents. And people hid their faces, and the children screamed with fear. The angry God spoke, "I shall reverse the world. I shall bid the rivers flow upward. I shall cause the sea to gather together itself up into a huge towering wall, which I shall hurl down upon your wicked earth children, and thus destroy them and all life." Rar. Jubmel set a storm wind blowing, and the wild air spirits raging, foaming, dashing, rising sky high. Came the seawall, crushing all things. Jubmel, with one strong upheaval, made the earth lands all turn over. Then the world again he righted. Now the mountains and the highlands could no more be seen by Bijike. Sun, filled with groans of dying people, was the fair earth, home of mankind. No more Bijike shone in heaven. According to Laplandic epic, the world was overwhelmed by the hurricane and the sea, and almost all human beings perished. After the sea wall fell on the continent, gigantic waves continued to roll. The dead bodies were dashed about in dark waters. The great earthquake and the chasms that opened in the ground, the appearance of a celestial body with serpent-like flashes, rivers flowing upward, a seawall that crushed everything, mountains that became leveled or covered with water, the world that was turned over and then righted, the sun that no more shone in the sky. All these are motifs which we found in the description of the calamities of the time of the Exodus. In many places of the world, and especially in the north, large boulders are found in a position which proves that great force must have lifted them up and carried them long distances before depositing them where they were found today. Sometimes these large loose rocks are of entirely different mineral composition from the local rocks, but are akin to formations many miles away. Thus, occasionally an erratic boulder of granite perches on top of a high ridge of dolerite, whereas the nearest outcrops of granite lie far away. These erratic boulders may weigh as much as 10,000 tons, about as much as 130,000 people. to explain these facts, the scholars of the first half of the 19th century assumed that enormous tides had swept over the continents and carried with them masses of stone. The transfer of the rocks was explained by the tides, but what could have caused these billows to rise high over the continents? It was conceived that somehow and somewhere in the far north, a series of gigantic waves was mysteriously propagated. But shouldn't that be were mysteriously propagated? Oh well, who's counting? These waves were supposed to have precipitated themselves upon the land, and then swept madly on over mountain and valley alike, carrying along with them a mighty burden of rocks and stones and rubbish. Such deluges were styled waves of translation, and the till was believed to represent the materials which they hurried along with them in their wild course across country. The stones and boulders on the hilltops and the mounds of sand and gravel and the lowlands were explained by this theory. Critics, however, maintain that it was unfortunate for this view that it violated at the very outset the first principles of science by assuming the former existence of a cause, which there was little in nature to warrant. Spasmodic rushes of the sea across the whole country had fortunately never been experienced within the memory of man. That the correctness of the last sentence was questionable is shown by references to the traditions of a number of peoples. Wherever possible, the movement of stone was attributed to the progress of the ice sheet in the glacial ages and to glaciers on the mountain slopes. Agassiz, in 1840, assumed that just as the alpine moraines were left behind by the retreating glaciers, so the moraines in the flatlands of northern Europe and America could have been caused by the movement of great continental ice sheets, and thus introduced the theory of ice ages. Although this is correct to some extent, the analogy is not exact, as the glaciers of the Alps push the stones down, not up the slope, meeting an upward motion of the ice. Large boulders would probably sink into the ice. The problem of the migration of the stones must be regarded as only partially connected with the progress and retreat of the ice sheet, if at all. Billows miles high traveled over the land, originating in the causes described in this book. It can be established by the extent of denudation of the rocks under the erratic boulders, that the latter were deposited at their places during human history. So, for instance, in Wales and in Yorkshire, where this effect was evaluated in terms of time, the amount of denudation of limestone rocks on which boulders lie is a proof that period of no more than 6,000 years has elapsed since the boulders were left in their positions. The fact that accumulations of stones were transferred from the equator toward the higher latitudes, an enigmatic problem in the ice theory, can be explained by the poleward recession of the equatorial waters at the moment the velocity of rotation of the Earth was reduced, or its poles were shifted. In the northern hemisphere, in India, the moraines were carried from the equator not only toward higher latitudes, but also toward the Himalaya mountains. And in the southern hemisphere, from the equatorial regions of Africa toward the higher latitudes, across the prairies and deserts and forests of the Black Continent. End of subchapter. Battle in the sky. At the same time that the seas were heaped up in immense tides, a pageant went on in the sky, which presented itself to the horrified onlookers on Earth as a gigantic battle, because this battle was seen from almost all parts of the world, and because it impressed itself very strongly upon the imagination of the peoples. It can be reconstructed in some detail. When the Earth passed through the gases, dust, and meteorites of the tail of the comet, it disturbed in rotation. It proceeded on a distorted orbit. Emerging from the darkness, the eastern hemisphere faced the head of the comet. This head, only shortly before, had passed close to the sun and was in a state of incandescence. The night the great earthquake shook the globe was, according to rabbinical literature, as bright as the day of summer solstice. Because of the proximity of the Earth, the comet left its own orbit, and for a while followed the orbit of the Earth. The great ball of the comet retreated, then again approached the Earth, shrouded in a dark column of gases, which looked like a pillar of smoke. During the day, and of fire at night, and the Earth once more passed through the atmosphere of the comet, this time at its neck. This stage was accompanied by violent and incessant electrical discharges between the atmosphere of the tail and the terrestrial atmosphere. There was an interval of about 6 days between these two close approaches. Emerging from the gases of the comet, the Earth seems to have changed the direction of its rotation, and the pillar of smoke moved to the opposite horizon. The column looked like a gigantic moving serpent. When the tidal waves rose to their highest point, and the seas were torn apart, a tremendous spark flew between the Earth and the globe of the comet, which instantly pushed down the miles-high billows. Meanwhile, the tail of the comet and its head, moving, having become entangled with each other by their close contact with the Earth, exchanged violent discharges of electricity. It looked like a battle between the brilliant globe and the dark column of smoke. In the exchange of electrical potentials, the tail and the head were attracted one to the other, and repelled one from the other. From the serpent-like tail, extensions grew, and it lost the form of a column. It looked now like a furious animal with legs and with many heads. The discharges tore the column to pieces, a process that was accompanied by rain of meteorites upon the Earth. It appeared as though the monster were defeated by the brilliant globe and buried in the sea. Wherever the meteorites fell, gases of the tail subsequently enveloped the Earth, the globe of the comet, which lost a large portion of its atmosphere as well. As much of its electrical potential withdrew from the Earth, but did not break away from its attraction. Apparently, after a 6-week interval, the distance between the Earth and the globe of the comet again diminished. This new approach of the globe could not be readily observed, because the Earth was shrouded in clouds of dust left by the comet on its former approach, as well as by dust ejected by the volcanoes. After renewed discharges, the comet and the Earth parted. This behavior of the comet is of great importance in problems of celestial mechanics. That a comet encountering a planet can become entangled and drawn away from its own path, forced into a new course, and finally liberated from the influence of the planet, is proved by the case of Lexell's comet, which in 1767 was captured by Jupiter and its moons. Not until 1779 did it free itself from the entanglement, a phenomenon that has not been observed in modern times, as an electrical discharge between a planet and a comet, and also between the head of the comet and its trailing part. The events in the sky were viewed by the peoples of the world as a fight between an evil monster in the form of a serpent and the light god, who engaged the monster in battle and thus saved the world. The tail of the comet, leaping back and forth under the discharges of the flaming globe, was regarded as a separate body, inimical to the globe of the comet. A full survey of the religious and folklore motifs which mirror this event would require more space than is at my disposal here. It is difficult to find a people or tribe on the Earth that does not have the same motif at the very focus of its religious beliefs. since the descriptions of battle between Marduk and Tiamat, the dragon, or Isis and Seth, or Vishnu and the serpent, or Krishna and the serpent, or Ormuzd and Ahriman, follow an almost identical pattern and have many details in common with the battle of Zeus and Typhon. I shall give here Apollodorus' description of this battle. Typhon out-topped all the mountains, and his head often brushed the stars. One of his hands reached out to the west, and the other to the cast, and from them projected 100 dragons' heads. From the thighs downward he had huge coils of vipers, which emitted a long hissing. His body was all winged, and fire flashed from his eyes. Such and so great was Typhon, when hurling kindled rocks, he made for the very heaven, with hissing and shouts, spouting a great jet of fire from his mouth. To the sky of Egypt Zeus pursued Typhon, rushing at heaven. Zeus pelted Typhon at a distance with thunderbolts, and at close quarters struck him down with an adamantine sickle, and as he fled pursued him closely, as far as Mount Cassius, which overhangs Syria. There, seeing the monster sore wounded, he grappled with him, but Typhon twined about him and gripped him in his coils. Having recovered his strength, Zeus suddenly, from heaven, riding in a chariot of winged horses, pelted Typhon with thunderbolts. So, being again pursued, he, Typhon, came to Thrace, and in fighting at Mount Haemus, he heaved whole mountains, and stream of blood gushed out on the mountain. And they say that from that circumstance the mountain was called Haemus, bloody. And when he started to flee through the Sicilian Sea, Zeus cast Mount Etna and Sicily upon him. That is a huge mountain from which down to this day they say that blasts of fire issue from thunderbolts that were thrown. The struggle left deep marks on the entire ancient world. Some districts were especially associated with the events of this cosmic flight. The Egyptian shore of the Red Sea was called Typhonia. Strabo narrates also that Armenians or Syrians were terrified witnesses of the battle of Zeus with Typhon, and Typhon, who they add was a dragon, when struck by the bolts of lightning, fled in search of a descent underground. And not only did he cut furrows into the earth and form the beds of rivers, but descending underground, he made fountains break forth. Similar descriptions come from various places of the ancient world, in which the nations relate the experience of their ancestors who witnessed the great catastrophe of the middle of the second millennium. At that time, the Israelites had not yet arrived at a clear monotheistic concept, and, like other peoples, they saw it in great struggle, a conflict between God and evil. The author of the book of Exodus, suppressing this conception of the ancient Israelites, presented the portent of fire and smoke moving in a column as an angel or messenger of the Lord. However, many passages in other books of the Scriptures preserve the picture as it impressed itself upon eyewitnesses. Rahab is the Hebrew name for the contester with the Most High. O Lord God of hosts, who is a strong Lord like unto thee, thou hast broken Rahab in pieces. The heavens are thine, the earth also is thine. As for the world and the fullness thereof, thou hast founded them. The north and the south thou hast created them. The true Isaiah prayed, Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the ancient days, in the generations of old. Art thou not it that hath cut Rahab and wounded the dragon? Art thou not it which hath dried the sea? The waters of the great deep, that hath made the depths of the sea a way for the ransom to pass over. From these passages it is clear that the battle of the Lord with Rahab was not a primeval battle before creation, as some scholars think. Isaiah prophesies for the future, and that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. The crooked serpent is shown in many ancient pictures from China to India, to Persia, to Assyria, to Egypt, to Mexico, with the rise of the monotheistic concept. The Israelites regarded this crooked serpent, the contester with the Most High, as the Lord's own creation. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. The pillars of heaven tremble. He divideth the sea with his power. His hand hath formed the crooked serpent. The psalmist also says, God is my king of old. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces. Thou didst cleave the fountain and the flood. Thou driest up mighty rivers. The sea was cleft. The earth was cut with furrows. Great rivers disappeared. Others appeared. The earth rumbled for many years. And the peoples thought that the fiery dragon that had been struck down had descended underground and was groaning there. End of subchapter. And no wonder people think it was God's. The Comet of Typhon. Of all the mysterious phenomena which accompany the Exodus, this mysterious pillar seems the first to demand explanation. W. Pythane Adams, The Call of Israel. One of the places of the heavenly combat between elementary forces of nature, as narrated by Apollodorus and Strabo, was on the way from Egypt to Syria. According to Herodotus, the final act of the fight between Zeus and Typhon took place at Lake Serbon, on the coastal route from Egypt to Palestine. On the way from Egypt to Palestine, the Israelites, after a night of terror and strong east wind, witnessed the upheaval of the day of the passage. These parallel circumstances led to a conclusion that will sound somewhat strange. Typhon, Typhus, lies on the bottom of the sea, where the spellbound Israelites saw the upheaval of nature. Darkness, hurricane, mountains of water, fire and smoke, recorded in the Greek legend as the circumstances in which the battle of Zeus with the dragon Typhon was fought. In the same pit of the sea lie the Pharaoh and his hosts. Up to now, I have identified Rahab Typhoon as a comet. But if Typhoon lies on the bottom of the sea, is he not the Pharaoh? This would mean that in the legend of Typhon, two elements were welded together. The Pharaoh, who perished in the catastrophe, and the outrageous rebel against Zeus, the Lord of the sky. In Pliny's Natural History, the 91st section of the second book reads, "A terrible comet was seen by the people of Ethiopia and Egypt, to which Typhon, the king of that period, gave his name. It had a fiery appearance and was twisted like a coil, and it was very grim to behold. It was not really a star so much as what might be called a ball of fire." The visit of a disastrous comet, so many times referred to in this book, is told in plain words, not in disguise. However, I must find support for my assumption that the comet of the days of King Typhon was the comet of the days of the Exodus. I investigated the writings of the old chronographers, and in Comet Graphia of Havelis, 1668, I found references to the works of Helvicus, Hurlesius, and Rockenbach, all of whom used manuscripts for the most part and not printed sources. as they lived only a little over 1 century after the invention of movable characters and the printing press. Hevelius wrote in Latin in the year of the world 2453, 1495 BC. According to certain authorities, a comet was seen in Syria, Babylonia, India, in the sign Joe, in the form of a disk. At the very time when the Israelites were on their march from Egypt to the Promised Land. So Reichenbach, the Exodus of the Israelites, is placed by Calvisius in the year of the world 2453, or 1495 BC. So to them it was 2453. How about that, We think we're living in the big times, 2021. There were 2,453, but it was really 1495 BC to us. I get it. I was fortunate enough to locate one copy of Reichenbach's De Cometis Tractatus Novus Methodiscus in the United States. This book was published in Wittenberg in 1602. Its author was Professor of Greek Mathematics and Law and Dean of Philosophy at Frankfurt. He wrote his book using old sources, Per subsivis antiquitimus Foederum Scriptoribus, from the most trustworthy and the most ancient of the early writers. As a result of his diligent gathering of ancient material, he made the following entry. In the year of the world 2453, as many trustworthy authors, on the basis of many conjectures, have determined, a comet appeared, which Pliny also mentioned in his second book. It was fiery, of irregular circular form, with a wrapped head. It was in the shape of a globe, and was of terrible aspect. It is said that King Typhon ruled at the time in Egypt. Certain authorities assert that the comet was seen in Syria, Babylonia, India, in the sign of Capricorn, in the form of a disk, at the time when the children of Israel advanced from Egypt toward the Promised Land, led on their way by the pillar of cloud during the day and by the pillar of fire at night. Reichenbach did not draw any conclusion on the relation of the comet of the days of Exodus to the natural phenomena of that time. His intent was only to fix the date of the comet of Typhon. Among the early authors, Letus Servius, who quotes Venus, Hephaestion, and Junctenus, in addition to Pliny, mentioned the Typhon comet. It is depicted as an immense globe, globus immaticus, of fire, also as a sickle, which is a description of a globe illuminated by the sun, and close enough to be observed thus. Its movement was slow. Its path was close to the sun. Its color was bloody. It was not of fiery, but of bloody redness. It caused destruction in rising and setting. Servius writes that this comet caused many plagues, evils, and hunger. To discover what were the manuscript sources of Abraham Reichenbach that led him to the same conclusion at which we have arrived, namely, that the Typhon comet appeared in the time of the Exodus, as a task not yet accomplished. Servius says that more information about the calamities caused by this comet is to be found in the writings of the Roman astrologer Campestor and in the works of the Egyptian astrologer Petrosirius. It is possible that copies of works of some authors containing citations from the writings of these ancient astrologers, preserved in the libraries of Europe, where Reichenbach's manuscript sources, Campestor, as quoted by Letus, was certain, and should the comet Typhon again meet the Earth, a 4-day encounter would suffice to destroy the world. This implies also that the first encounter with the comet Typhon brought the Earth to the brink of destruction. But even without this somber prognostication of Kempester, we have a very imposing and quite inexhaustible array of references to Typhon and its destructive action against the world. Almost every Greek author referred to it, the real name of Typhon being that of a comet, as explained by Pliny and others. All references to the disasters caused by Typhon must be understood as descriptions of natural catastrophes in which the Earth and the comet were involved. As is known, Pallas of the Greeks was another name for Typhon. Also, Seth of the Egyptians was an equivalent of Typhon. Thus, the number of references to the comet Typhon can be enlarged by references to Pallas and Seth. It was not only Abraham Rockenbach who synchronized the appearance of the comet Typhon with the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. Looking for authors who might have done likewise, I found that Samuel Bochart, a scholarly writer of the 17th century, in his book Heriozoukon, has a passage which he maintains that the plagues of the days of the Exodus resemble the calamities that Typhon brought in this train, and therefore the flight of Typhon is the exodus of Moses from Egypt. In this, he actually follows the passage transmitted by Plutarch. But since Typhon, according to Pliny and others, was a comet, Samuel Bochart was close to the conclusions at which we arrived, traveling along another route. End of subchapter. The spark. A phenomenon of great significance took place. The head of the comet did not crash into the Earth, but exchanged major electrical discharges with it. A tremendous spark sprang forth at the moment of the nearest approach of the comet, when the waters were heaped at their highest above the surface of the Earth, and before they fell down, followed by a rain of debris torn from the very body and tail of the comet. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it was a cloud in darkness, but it gave light by night, an exceedingly strong wind, and lightnings rent the cloud. In the morning the waters rose as a wall and moved away, and the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them, and their right hand, and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued, and it came to pass that in the morning watched the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. The immense tides were caused by the presence of a celestial body close by. They fell when a discharge occurred between the earth and the other body. Artapanus, the author of No Longer Extant De Judaeus, apparently knew that the words, "The Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire of the cloud," refer to a great lightning. Eusebius quotes Artapanus. But when the Egyptians were pursuing them, a fire, it is said, shone out upon them from the front, and the sea overflowed the path again, and the Egyptians were all destroyed. The fire and the flood. The great discharges of interplanetary force are commemorated in the traditions, legends, and mythology of all peoples of the world. The god Zeus of the Greeks, Odin of the Icelanders, Ukko of the Finns, Perun of the Russian pagans, Wotan, Woden of the Germans, Mazda of the Persians, Marduk of the Babylonians, Shiva of the Hindus, is pictured with lightning in his hand and described as the god who threw his thunderbolt at the world, overwhelmed with water and fire. Similarly, many psalms of the scriptures commemorate the great discharges. Then the earth shook and trembled, and the foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken. He bowed the heavens also, and came down. He did fly upon the wings of the wind at the brightness that was before him. His thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals of fire. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the highest gave his voice, hailstones and coals of fire. And he shot out lightnings. Then the channels of waters were seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord breaketh the cedars. The voice of the Lord divideth the flames of the fire. The voice of the Lord shaketh the wilderness. The Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh. The kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice. The earth melted. The waters saw thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The skies sent a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lightened the universe. The earth trembled and shook. Clouds and darkness are round about him. A fire goeth before him, and burnt up his enemies round about. His lightnings enlightened the world. The earth saw and trembled. Nothing is easier than to add to the number of such quotations from other parts of the scriptures. Job, the Song of Deborah, the prophets. With the fall of the double wall of water, the Egyptian host was swept away. The force of the impact threw the Pharaoh's army into the air. Come and see the works of God. He is terrible in his doing toward the children of men. He turned the sea into dry land. He went through the flood on foot. Thou hast caused men to ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water. This tossing of the Egyptian host into the air by an avalanche of water is referred to also in the Egyptian source I quoted before. On the shrine found in El Arish, the story is told of a hurricane and a prolonged darkness when nobody could leave the palace, and of the pursuit by the pharaoh Tawi-Tum, of the fleeing slaves, whom he followed to
Pi-Karati,
which is the biblical Pi-Karath. His Majesty leaped into the place of the whirlpool. Then it said that he was lifted by a great force. Although the larger part of the Israelite fugitives were already out of the reach of the falling tidal waves, a great number of them perished in this disaster, as in the previous ones of fire and hurricane of cinders. The Israelites perished at the Sea of Passage, is implied in Psalm 68, where mention is made of my people that remained in the depths of the sea. These tidal waves also overwhelmed entire tribes who inhabited Tehama, the 1,000-mile-long coastal region of the Red Sea. God sent against the
Jorhomites,
swift clouds, ants, and other signs of his rage, and many of them perished. In the land of Johanna, an impetuous torrent carried off all of them in a night. The scene of this catastrophe is known by the name of Edom, fury. The author of this passage, Masudi, an Arab author of the 10th century, quotes an earlier author, Umayyah, son of Abu Salt. In days of yore, the Jorhomites settled in Tehama, and a violent flood carried them all away. Likewise, the tradition related in the Kitab al-Aghani is familiar with the plague of insects, ants of the smallest variety, that forced the tribe to migrate from Hejaz to their native land, where they were destroyed by Tufan, a deluge. In my reconstruction of ancient history, I endeavor to establish the synchronism of these events and the Exodus. End of subchapter. The collapsed sky. A rain of meteorites and fire from the sky, the clouds of dust of exogenous origin that drifted low, and the displacement of the world quarters created the impression that the sky had collapsed. The ancient peoples of Mexico referred to a world age that came to its end when the sky collapsed and the darkness enshrouded the world. Strabo relates in the name of Ptolemies, and son of Lagus, a general of Alexander and founder of the Egyptian dynasty called by his name, that the Celti, who lived on the shores of the Adriatic, were asked by Alexander what it was they most feared, to which they replied that they feared no one, but only that the sky might collapse. The Chinese refer to the collapse of the sky which took place when the mountains fell, because the mountains fell or were leveled at the same time, when the sky was displaced. Ancient peoples, not only the Chinese, thought that the mountains support the sky. The earth trembled and the heavens dropped. The mountains melted, says the Song of Deborah. The earth shook, the heavens also dropped at the presence of God. Even Sinai itself was moved, say the psalmists. The tribe of Samoa and their legends refer to a catastrophe when, in days of old, the heavens fell down. The heavens or the clouds were so low that the people could not stand erect without touching them. The Finns tell in their Kalevala that the support of the sky gave way, and then a spark of fire kindled a new sun and a new moon. The Lapps make offerings, accompanied by the prayer that the sky should not lose its support and fall down. The Eskimos of Greenland are afraid that the support of the sky may fail and the sky fall down and kill all human beings. A darkening of the sun and the moon will precede such a catastrophe. The primitives of Africa, in eastern as well as western provinces of the continent, tell about the collapse of the sky in the past. The Ovaherero tribesmen say that many years ago, the greats of the sky, Iuru, let the sky fall on the earth. Almost all people were killed. Only a few remained alive. The tribes of the Kanga and the Longa also have a tradition of the collapse of the sky, which annihilated the human race. The Wanyaro and Uniyaro likewise relate that the sky fell on the earth and killed everybody. The god Kagra threw the firmament upon the earth to destroy mankind. The tradition of the Kashinua, the Aborigines of western Brazil, is narrated as follows. The lightnings flashed and the thunders roared terribly, and all were afraid. Then the heaven burst, and the fragments fell down and killed everything and everybody. Heaven and earth changed places. Nothing that had life was left upon the earth. In this tradition are included the same elements, the lightnings and thunderings, the burst of heaven, the fall of meteorites, above the change of places between heaven and earth. There is more to say, and I shall not postpone the subject for long. End of chapter. Thank you for listening.